Great. Well, what a blessing it is to be with you tonight as we discuss this series on relationships. You know, one of the first things that God said to man in the garden is it's not good for man to be alone. And so he brought a helpmate, someone to help him live his life, into his life. We are made and we are meant to have relationships. And so this series on relationships has been a blessing, I hope, to you. And hopefully it's a blessing to those with whom you are in relationship. Because the quality of our life is directly corresponding to the quality of the relationships we have in our life. We are made to live in relationship with other people. And so these concepts that we've been discussing these last few weeks are very, very powerful. About how we need to be connected to people versus conflicted with them. I loved our lesson on how we need to have boundaries versus barriers. And I thought Evan did a wonderful job last week. And so this week on Lust and Love. And this week we're talking about how to be present versus passive. And we wrap up our series next week where Sean and Randy will be presenting a message on responsive versus reactive. But present versus passive. This is something that this is a way that we come into a relationship. That while we are in relationship with a person, we are present. We are not just passive. Because it takes two to have this relationship. I love that beautiful passage in Ecclesiastes 4:9 that says, "Two are better off than one, for they help each other succeed." And that only happens when we are engaged in the relationships of those around us. And we're there to help each other be better people. That's what relationships are all about. Proverbs 27:17, "As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another." We're not there to dull people, and I guess if you're passive in relationships, it can make up for a very dull relationship. But we're there to help people become the person God created them to be, to sharpen them and help them develop. And so as we think about this concept of present versus passive, the basic thesis that I'm building it off of is the thought that relationships thrive when we are present and fade when we are passive. Relationships thrive through when we are present. Wow, what a great non-way of saying that. But let's try it. Relationships thrive when we are present and fade when we're passive. I need to write my PowerPoint better. And so it helps when we're engaged. Now, any of you believe in talking to plants? Thank you very much. A few confessions. Have you ever heard of the TV show Mythbusters? So one of the Mythbusters, actually they did a test on this about do plants thrive when you talk to them? And I thought it was very interesting the way that they chose to set this up. They had 3 identical greenhouses, and they bought peas and put them in all 3, very similar plants. And in one greenhouse, they said very positive things on a recording and had it play 24 hours a day. In another greenhouse, they said very negative things, really mean and mean context, and had it play. And in the third one, they didn't have any voices at all. And they did this for 60 days to let the plants have the opportunity to flourish. At the end of 60 days, what they did was they weighed the plants, the bio content of it, and all the peas and all that kind of stuff. Oddly enough, the 2 that had recordings playing both identically excelled over the one with no voices in it at all. Now, it doesn't matter if you're nice or mean, you still thrive the same, or if somebody's present in your life. So, my conclusion is we should be present in people's lives, but be nice anyway, because we're not plants. Listen, the presence of the voices of those around us make a difference. So I thought I would start with what passive looks like. What does passive look like? Physically, mentally, emotionally. Physically, I guess if we're passive physically, that means we're not present at all. I mean, we just removed ourselves from a situation. Or when we are present, we have closed ourselves off. We are physically placing ourselves in a method that is closed off from others. And of course, that kind of ties into being mentally passive as well. That means when we're not engaged, our mind is another place. It looks like someone with their nose in the newspaper with other people talking around them not paying attention. It's a father watching TV when a child is trying to show him his papers from school. It is a child playing games on TV and not listening and not being engaged. It is mentally passive to those who are around us. And then emotionally passive just means I'm non-responsive to emotional expressions. It's an absence of smiles or laughter or even tears. You're expressing an emotion, and I am not responding to that emotion at all. Now, did I do a pretty good job of describing these? I did so good because I really struggle with this. Way too many times in life, that would be me. I'm the kind of person that all too often builds a wall up and stays on my side and expects others to stay on theirs as well. So I couldn't help but laugh when I saw this cartoon this week. Okay, so I'm the only person that thinks that's funny, but I actually get a big kick out of that. For some of us, the ways that we cope is just we build up our walls and we refuse to listen. Another way many of us cope is what we're going to call tonight the Naaman syndrome. The Naaman syndrome. We wimp out. We're the kind of people that thinks if it's big, I'll do it, but if it's little, I'm out. If it calls for a hero, call on me, but if it calls for a little thing, leave me alone. You remember the story of Naaman, don't you? Naaman was a commander in the army, was very well accomplished, was very well liked by other people. The story is found in 2 Kings chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. So here he is, this valiant soldier that everybody likes, but he has leprosy. Well, the soldiers have been out into God's country, and they have captured this little servant girl, and she is a servant to Naaman's wife. And so she tells her mistress, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. So Naaman gets permission from the king. May I go? The king says, not only can you go, take all this silver, all this gold, all these clothes, all this expensive things, and I'll even write a letter to the king there, and you go. Well, the king was very intimidated, but the prophet hears about it, and he goes to Elisha, says, send him to our house, send him to my house. And when he arrives, he shows up at Elisha's house with all the horses and the chariots in verses 9 through 14, and Elisha sends out a servant to tell him, go wash 7 times in the Jordan River and you'll be made clean. You'll be restored. But Naaman went away angry, and he says, wait a second, I thought he would surely come out and wave his hands over me and call upon his God. I've brought these impressive gifts. I expected an impressive show. I had expectations of how he would respond. And so he goes away angry. If he's not going to do that, I can go wash in a couple of rivers back home that are a lot more cleaner and nicer and closer to home. Why should I go and wash in the Jordan River? But Naaman's servant comes up to him and said, if the prophet had asked you to do something grand, something big, wouldn't you have done it? So how much more when he tells you wash and be cleansed? So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him. And his flesh was restored, and he became clean like that of a young boy. Naaman was after the big things. Put on a show, take my gifts, I've got it all here. But if it's little, I'm out. I'm going to check out. Too many times, that's how we enter in relationships. We're there for the big times, but we check out on the little things. I think the answer is to do what God places in front of us with our children, with our spouses, with our friends, with our church. And yet we have these big expectations, don't we, from our relationships. But sometimes God's just asking us to do the little things, to stop and think, just like Naaman did. Fortunately, he had a good servant that got him to stop and think. And sometimes cherish those little things, those little moments. What's the saying? Stop and smell the roses, or enjoy the small stuff. There is such great joy in the little things. I come from a family of teachers. My mom's a teacher, and Brenda's whole side of the families are all teachers and county superintendents and all that kind of things, her grandfather. And so teaching's a subject that's around our house all the time. And this past week, my wife and my youngest daughter were talking about teaching and all the struggles and the challenges and how sometimes it's the little things that make it different. And I chuckled and laughed. And I remember when we were first married, Brenda was teaching special ed, and she had a special girl in her class named Sandra. And one day Brenda came home just thrilled because on Sandra's IEP, Sandra was very low functioning, one of her IEPs was that Sandra would not lick her glasses. I mean, she would take off her glasses and lick them and put them back on. And so part of her individual assessment plan was to get her not to lick her glasses. She went a whole day and didn't lick her glasses. And Brenda was pumped. And I remember thinking, now that's a little thing. But not for Sandra, it wasn't. Sometimes you have to have joy in the little things in life. To learn how to stop and celebrate. Listen, our God is ever present. He is present on those big moments with us, and aren't we thankful? And He's present in those small moments. He's there for us when we do good things that are good, and He's there for us even when we've done things that are wrong. I want to be like my Father, don't you? To be present, not just for the big things, but for the little things. Another hurdle that we face in this concept of being present versus passive is a concept that I learned about just this week. Our resident counselor, Sean McElroy, was visiting with me, and he introduced me to the thought of learned helplessness. Learned helplessness. It was first written about and defined by a psychologist named Martin Seligman in 1967. And he did this experiment with dogs, and I'm not going to go into all. It's very interesting if you want to check into it. But basically, it's the thought when someone doesn't feel like they have any control over their situation or over their world, they just give up and check out. And there's no control, so positive stimuli doesn't get them to do anything. There's negative stimuli. Punishment or reward no longer matters. They just lay down and they do nothing. Now, my favorite cartoon to help illustrate it is this one with the elephant. Yeah. Learned helplessness. How they teach an elephant not to pull up a peg because they couldn't move a tree when they were small. I also found a pretty creative video to try and to make the point. It's a video. Here's an image of it. It's these two people that are on an escalator. You probably can't tell. And as they're moving up the escalator, all of a sudden the escalator stops and it's frozen. And they get very, very frustrated. They start yelling over their shoulder to each other. Can you believe this happened? Do you have a phone? Call somebody. No, I didn't bring my phone. So they start screaming and yelling for someone. Please help us. We're on an escalator and it's stuck. It just makes me chuckle. I mean, just do something. And yet, how many times in life have we learned helplessness? Nothing's going to get us to change or to do anything. We just lay down. We just stand still. All too often, I think we've learned helplessness in our spiritual walk as well. Paul described it in the spiritual journey like this in Romans chapter 7, beginning in verse 19. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. So I find this law at work. Although I want to do good, evil is right there with me. What a wretched man I am. Who's going to rescue me from this body that's subject to death? I might as well just lay down and give up. Because it is hopeless. I have learned helplessness. But His answer is the same answer for us as believers. It's true for us in our walk with Christ, and it's true for us in our walk with each other. Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord. There is help available for my walk in relationship with other people. And a big part of that is just to learn to make the most of the moment. Just make the most of the moment. To illustrate this, I want to go to Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42, and talk about a story of Mary and Martha. And in this, just follow along. As Jesus and His disciples were on their way, He came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to Him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what He said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to Him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Mary was in the moment. She was present. Martha was busy, but Mary was in that moment. And all too often we get so caught up with our tasks and the things that are taking place that we find ourselves being passive instead of present in the moment. I've often told this story. You've probably heard it before, but a time that I really learned this lesson. Spring break mission trips to Mexico were a very big part of my life when our kids were growing up. And that trip would take me away basically for 10, 11 days of the trip, but a week before and about a week after. So when we started having children, Brenda would often just take the kids and go down to her parents' house while I was gone. March is about the time the grass starts growing, and Caleb was at an age when he was quite young, but he loved to mow the grass. So when I got back from Mexico, they were going to come in a day or two, and the grass needed to be mowed. It was time to mow. But I thought, you know what, I'll wait until Caleb gets home, and we'll mow the grass together. It's something that he loves to do, and we can do this together, and I can be the kind of father that is joining together in a task that we both enjoy. When Caleb got home, we were so excited. He couldn't wait to mow the yard. So we get out there to mow the yard, and we start mowing it together. And all of a sudden, the neighborhood little boy, Corey, comes out, and Caleb's wanting to go talk to Corey, or a dog comes by, and Caleb wants to talk to him. Caleb kept getting distracted. And I remember thinking, at this rate, I'm never going to get this yard mowed. And it hit me. At this rate, I'm never going to raise a child. It wasn't. I waited for Caleb to get home so we could do this together, so I could be a father. Not so we could get the grass mowed. I could have done that 2 days earlier. How many times do we get so busy and so caught up with things that are happening that we don't make the most of the moment? So as we move forward, I just want to talk about a few ways that we can thrive. How do you thrive? And first of all, I would just say that you need to be physically present. Physically present. I agree with the statement, the person who said that the greatest gift a parent can ever give their child is the present of their presence. Just being present in their lives. Being there. And the greatest gift we can give to those people who are around us is the present of our presence. Just be there. One of the times that I notice this most vividly is at funerals. People are grieving. They've had a loss. And they just need the presence of other people, just to be there for them. Believe me, it's not in what you say, because a lot of us say the silliest things at funerals or when people are hurting. In fact, oftentimes I say, may this be one of those occasions where our presence speaks louder than our words of our love and compassion, because sometimes we don't say the best things, but people smile because we are present in our lives. There is power in a sympathetic smile and a hug, to just be there. Just be there. Many of you remember Carol Van Zandt, one of our minister wives several years ago. And do you remember the old Platter songs, The Great Pretender? Yeah, right. Some of us do remember that song. Well, Carol thought it was very important to be present at key times in people's lives. And so she tried never to miss a shower, whether she knew the person or not. And she used to call herself the Great Attender. The Great Attender. I always got a kick out of that. We just need to be attenders, people that are present in the happy times and the sorrowful times, just to be there. I love this scene of how Paul loved to be in the presence of those he loved. There's a very touching scene in Acts chapter 20. It's one of those scenes that I would love to get to watch in the rerun room in heaven, in the movie room in heaven. This would be a very touching, emotional scene to watch. It's where Paul's headed back to Jerusalem after the missionary journey, and he knows if he stops through Ephesus that he'll be there forever because of the ties, but he wants to see them. So he stops and he sends for the elders from Ephesus, and they come, and he has this visit with them. And then picking up the story in verse 36, when Paul had finished speaking, he knelt down with all of them and prayed, and they all wept as they embraced him and kissed him. What grieved them most was his statement that they would never see his face again. Then they accompanied him to the ship. He just wanted to be with them. He gave them the present of his presence with them, to be there. And it's not always in saying the biggest things. In fact, sometimes being silent is a good thing. You probably remember the quote, better to remain silent and be thoughtful than to speak out and remove all doubt. I tried to find out who said that. It's accredited to Abraham Lincoln and to Mark Twain, and I doubt either one of them said it, but it's a very careful thought. But I don't know who said this, but I do know what God said in Proverbs 17:28. Even fools are thought wise when they keep silent. With their mouths shut, they seem intelligent. You know, sometimes we just need to be there and be quiet. Just be silent. Presence is the key. Wise sayings are definitely optional. You know, there are times as a minister that I find myself at funerals or in hospitals or places where I really feel like I need to say something wise. Okay, I need to, this person has talked to me or I'm here with them. I need something really wise or powerful or spiritual to say. And the pressure's on. And I've discovered that usually when I feel that kind of pressure, God's not speaking through me. I'm speaking myself, and that's not going to be a very wise statement. So just, unless I really feel like I have a word from God, I just keep silent. But if something needs to be said, here's my go-to. So next time I say this to you, you know I'm falling back on this. Here's my go-to. God bless you. I mean, that's what I feel. I have to tell you, it's not always well received because some people don't want to hear about God in those moments. But it's what I feel, and it's always my prayer. So if you ever catch yourself in an awkward moment where you're just trying to be present in another person's life, and you just don't know what to say, but you feel like you need to say something, first of all, I just say don't say anything. But if you feel like you need to say something, get you a go-to line. If you want, borrow mine. I borrowed it from somebody else. God bless. I pray God's going to bless you. And just be there. Physically present. That's one way to help relationships thrive. A second way is to be mentally present. To think, to hear, to listen, to understand. Not just think about what you're going to say next, but just to be mentally present with others. I get a real kick out of listening to some of a sports radio station where there's 2 or 3 people that are on radio, and one of them's making this, going off on this diatribe. He's making this comment, and the other one's supposed to respond, and he ends his comments by asking a question or calling on the next person, and the other person goes, yeah, and then they go off in a whole different direction. They weren't a bit listening to him. They were thinking about what they were going to say next, and they weren't paying a bit of attention. I think that's very humorous. They weren't listening. We need to be listening, mentally present in a relationship. Personally, I am the kind of person who I cannot engage in any conversation with the television on. I mean, the TV can be on my least favorite channel, Hallmark Channel or cooking channels. It can be on my least favorite channels, and I'll have to, Brenda, can I turn that off? Because I can't listen with a TV on. I just can't engage. Listen, no matter what the distractions around us, or what's happening in our world or in our lives, we have one that always listens. We have a model to follow, and that's our high priest, Jesus the Christ. Hebrews 4:15, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. I mean, our high priest, Jesus, he wasn't distracted by his surroundings. He came to where we were. He was present. He is present. He did listen, and he does listen, and he understands. And in relationships, we need to do the exact same things. We need to empathize. We need to listen. We need to understand. We need to be emotionally present as well. Mentally present, but also that means emotionally we come alongside those around us. Not just sympathy, but empathy. It's where we try to understand, or we do understand, and we join in with them. 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 through 4. Praise be to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves received from God. So you went through a challenging time. Reflect on where you found comfort in that time. And then when you find someone else going through a similar time, remember it's not just like yours, but it's similar. And empathize with them. Let their pain into your heart. And then remember the things that brought you comfort and do those things. And as you do them, remember that one of the things that didn't bring you comfort was when somebody sat down beside you and said, let me tell you my story about everything that happened to me and how this affected me. No. The comfort wasn't in somebody telling you all about their pain so that you wouldn't feel so bad because they had it worse. That's not comfort. It's just to be there, to be present, and try and be with them. Be emotionally present. Romans 12, 15 and 16. This is what it looks like. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Let our lives be that are harmonious. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. In other words, rejoice with those who are rejoicing, not because you've had similar awards or prizes, and let me tell you about them as you get yours. Rejoice with them. Be there with them. To join in the feelings of others as if we were experiencing their feelings with them. Listen, there are many challenging times in life. Life is never dull and never lacks for excitement. And as Christians, we have an opportunity to come alongside each other during those moments. And our perspective on eternity with Christ can free us up to live fully with those who are around us, to be emotionally present. 1 Corinthians 12:26. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. Now, there's so much in that passage, but just remember to allow others' people pain to enter your heart and suffer with them, feel with them, and to let their joy enter into your heart and to rejoice with them as well. How to thrive? And this concept of being present versus passive. I want to tell one more quick Bible story. And it's back to Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus. Their brother Lazarus becomes sick in John chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. And Mary and Martha know that he's very ill, so they send word to Jesus. And Jesus gets the word, and he decides not to go. He waits. He waits a couple of days, and then he decides that he is going to make the journey. And on his arrival, he finds out that Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. Well, Martha heard that Jesus was coming, and so she runs out to him. And listen to her words in verse 21. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Well, Jesus talks to her about how he is the resurrection and he is the life to help her understand. And then she goes and gets her sister Mary. And Mary comes to Jesus, and when she comes to him in verse 32, she falls at his feet and she says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Let me point out, those are the identical words of Martha. This is a conversation they had had. If Jesus had been present, things would have been different. If you'd just been here, if only. Well, in verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And he asked, where have you laid him? Come and see, Lord, they replied. In verse 35, Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. And then once again in verse 38, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. And he's deeply moved. And he says, take away the stone. And after a discussion about the odor, they take away the stone. And Jesus looked up and said, and prays this prayer, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. And when he said it in a loud voice, he called out, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, and he said, take off the grave clothes and let him go. And just to sum up, I want to make a few points from this story about present versus passive. When you are present, listen. Listen. You know, Jesus had already made a decision. He decided not to go, and he decided to go. And when he decided to go, he knew he was going into danger. It's the extent of the story. He was headed back to Jerusalem, not far away. He was going, and he was going to be arrested, and he knew this was coming. But he made a decision to go. He decided. He had a course of action, and he stayed on it. It was not the safe course of action, but it was a thoughtful action. And so our call today is to be thoughtful and minded and mindful in our actions. And part of that means when we are present, we are going to listen. I mean, he heard Mary's words and Martha's, if only you'd been here. He just listened to them. And when present, feel. I mean, when Jesus saw her weeping and other people weeping, he was deeply moved and troubled. And he shared in that emotion, and he wept with them. When you're present, listen and feel. And when you are present, show God's presence. That prayer I read said, God, I'm saying this out loud, and I'm saying it clearly. I know you're always with me, but there are some other people here with me right now too. And I want to show them that I'm not only present, but you are present as well. And so as we think about how we want this lesson to change our lives, I think the call is to be present and listen. To be present with other people and feel their feelings. To reflect some emotion. And while we're present, to make sure that they know that God cares and is there as well. Because God is there for them just as He has been there for us. We're fixing to sing a song of invitation. And the invitation is to come to the Christ who was there for us in our time of need and helped us so that we could be with Him forever in heaven someday. You know, there was a time where we were sinners, when we were not acting as we should. And while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He did that to reconcile us with God so that we could be friends again, be back in relationship with God. And if you need that blood to cleanse you of your sins tonight, I hope, if you've never given your life to Christ in baptism, that you'll do so tonight. For those of us who are Christians, remember that cleansing blood will continue to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And if we need to help you on your journey by praying with you and coming alongside you, we'd love to do so tonight. How's your relationship status with God? Here's the invitation, Romans 5, verse 11. And not only that, but now we are also very happy in God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Through Him, we are now God's friends again. We are reconciled. If we can help you with your relationship with God, we'd invite you to come right now as we stand together and sing.